And it was in the night that Abram was born that all the servants of Terach and all the wise men of Nimrod and his conjurers came and ate and drank in the house of Terach, and they rejoiced with him on that night. And when all these wise men and conjurers went out from the house of Terach, they lifted up their eyes towards heaven that night to look at the stars, and they saw, and behold, one very large star came from the east and ran in the heavens. And he swallowed up the 4 stars from the 4 sides of heaven. And all the wise men of the king and his conjurers were astonished at the sight. And the sages understood this matter, and they knew its import. And they said to each other, "This only betokens the child that has been born to Terach this night, who will grow up and be fruitful and multiply and possess all the earth, he and his children forever. And he and his seed will slay great kings and inherit their lands." And the wise men and conjurers went home that night, and in the morning all these wise men and conjurers rose up early and assembled in an appointed house. And they spoke and said to each other, "Behold, the sight that we saw last night is hidden from the king. It has not been made known to him. And should this thing get known to the king in the latter days, he will say to us, 'Why have you concealed this matter from me?' And then we shall all suffer death. Therefore, now let us go and tell the king the sight which we saw, and the interpretation thereof, and we shall then remain clear." And they did so. And they all went to the king and bowed down to him to the ground. And they said, "May the king live, may the king live." And we heard that a son was born to Terach, the son of Nahor, the prince of your host. And we yesternight came to his house, and we ate and we drank and rejoiced with him that night. And when your servants went out from the house of Terach to go to our respective homes to abide there for the night, we lifted up our eyes to heaven and saw a great star coming from the east, and the same star ran with great speed and swallowed up 4 great stars from the 4 sides of heaven. And your servants were astonished at the sight which we saw, and were greatly terrified. And we made our judgment upon the sight, and knew by our wisdom the proper interpretation thereof. And this thing applies to the child that is born to Terach, who will grow up and multiply greatly and become powerful, and kill all the kings of the earth, and inherit all their lands, he and his seed forever. And now, our Lord and King, behold, we have truly acquainted you with what we have seen concerning this child. If it seems good to the king to give his father value for this child, we will slay him before he shall grow up and increase in the land, and his evil increases against us, that we and our children perish through his evil." And the king heard their words, and they seemed good in his sight. And he sent and called for Terach, and Terach came before the king. And the king said to Terach, "I have been told that a son was yesternight born to you, and after this manner was observed in the heavens at his birth. And now, therefore, give me the child, that we may slay him before his evil springs up against us, and I will give you for his value your house full of silver and gold." And Terach answered the king and said to him, "My lord and king, I have heard your words, and your servant shall do all that his king desires. But my lord and king, I will tell you what happened to me yesternight, that I may see what advice the king will give his servant. And then I will answer the king upon what he has just spoken." And the king said, "Speak." And Terach said to the king, "Ayon, son of Mored, came to me last night, saying, 'Give unto me the great and beautiful horse that the king gave you, and I will give you silver and gold and straw and provender for its value.' And I said to him, 'Wait till I see the king concerning your words, and behold, whatsoever the king says, that will I do.' And now, my lord and king, behold, I have made this thing known to you, and the advice which my king will give unto his servant, that will I follow. And the king heard the words of Terach, and his anger was kindled, and considered him in the light of a fool. And the king answered Terach, and he said to him, Are you so silly, ignorant, or defiant in the understanding, to do this thing, to give your beautiful horse for silver and gold, or even for straw and provender? Are you so short of silver and gold that you should do this thing because you cannot obtain straw or provender to feed your horse? And what is silver and gold to you, or straw and provender, that you should give away that fine horse which I gave you, like which there is none to be had in the whole earth? And the king left off speaking, and Terach answered the king, saying, Like unto this has the king spoken to his servant. I beseech you, my lord and king, what is this which you did say unto me, saying, Give your son that we may slay him, and I will give you silver and gold for his value? What shall I do with silver and gold after the death of my son? Who shall inherit me? Surely then, at my death, the silver and gold will return to my king who gave it. And when the king heard the words of Terach and the parable which he brought concerning the king, it grieved him greatly, and he was vexed at this thing, and his anger burned within him. And Terach saw that the anger of the king was kindled against him, and he answered the king, saying, All that I have is in the king's power. Whatsoever the king desires to do to his servant, that let him do. Yea, even my son, he is in the king's power without value in exchange. He and his two brothers that are older than he. And the king said to Terach, No, but I will purchase your younger son for a price. And Terach answered the king, saying, I beseech you, my lord and king, to let your servant speak a word before you, and let the king hear the word of his servant. And Terach said, Let my king give me 3 days' time till I consider this matter within myself, and consult with my family concerning the words of my king. And he pressed the king greatly to agree to this. And the king hearkened to Terach, and he did so, and gave him 3 days' time. And Terach went out from the king's presence, and he came home to his family and spoke to them all the words of the king. And the people were greatly afraid. And it was in the 3rd day that the king sent to Terach, saying, Send me your son for a price, as I spoke to you. And should you not do this, I will send and slay all you have in your house, so that you shall not even have a dog remaining. And Terach hastened, as the thing was urgent from the king. And he took a child from one of his servants, which his handmaid had borne to him that day. And Terach brought the child to the king and received value for him. And Yahuwah was with Terach in this matter, that Nimrod might not cause Abram's death. And the king took the child from Terach with all his might, dashed his head into the ground, for he thought it had been Abram. And this was concealed from him from that day, and it was forgotten by the king, as it was the will of providence not to suffer Abram's death. And Terach took Abram his son secretly, together with his mother and nurse, and he concealed them in a cave, and he brought them their provisions monthly. And Yahuwah was Abram in the cave, and he grew up, and Abram was in the cave 10 years. And the king and his princes, soothsayers, and sages thought that the king had killed Abram. And Haran, the son of Terach, Abram's oldest brother, took a woman in those days. Haran was 39 years old when he took her, and the woman of Haran conceived and bore a son, and he called his name Lot. And she conceived again and bore a daughter, and she called her name Milcah. And she again conceived and bore a daughter, and she called her name Sarai. Haran was 42 years old when he begat Sarai, which was in the 10th year of the life of Abram. And in those days, Abram and his mother and nurse went out from the cave, as the king and his subjects had forgotten the affair of Abram. And when Abram come out from the cave, he went to Noah and his son Shem, and he remained with them to learn the instructions of Yahweh and his ways. And no man knew where Abram was. And Abram served Noah and Shem, his son, for a long time. And Abram was in Noah's house 39 years, and Abram knew Yahweh from 3 years old, and he went in the ways of Yahweh until the day of his death, as Noah and his son Shem had taught him. And all the sons of earth in those days greatly transgressed against Yahweh, and they rebelled against him, and they served other Elohim, and they forgot Yahweh, who had created them on the earth, and the inhabitants of the earth made unto themselves at that time every man his Elohim, Elohim of wood and stone, which could neither speak nor deliver, and the sons of men served them, and they became their Elohim. And the king and all his servants and Terach with all his household were then the first of those that served Elohim of wood and stone. And Terach had 12 Elohim of large size, made of wood and stone, after the 12 months of the year, and he served each one monthly. And every month Terach would bring his meat of offering and drink offering to his Elohim. Thus did Terach all the days. And all the generation were wicked in the sight of Yahweh, and they thus made every man his Elohim. But they forsook Yahweh, who had created them, and there was not a man found in those days in the whole earth who knew Yahweh, for they served each man his own Elohim, except Noah and his household, and all those that were under his counsel knew Yahweh in those days. And Abram, the son of Terach, was waxing great in those days in the house of Noah, and no man knew it, and Yahweh was with him. And Yahweh gave Abram an understanding heart, and he knew all the works that generation were vain, and that all their Elohim were vain, and were of no avail. And Abram saw the sun shining upon the earth, and Abram said unto himself, surely now this sun that shines upon the earth is Elohim, and him will I serve. And Abram served the sun in that day, and he prayed to him. And when evening came, the sun set as usual, and Abram said within himself, surely this cannot be Elohim. And Abram still continued to speak within himself, who is he who made the heavens and the earth? Who created upon earth? Where is he? And night darkened over him, and he lifted up his eyes towards the west, north, south, and east, and he saw that the sun had vanished from the earth, and the day became dark. And Abram saw the stars and moon before him, and he said, surely this is the Elohim who created the whole earth as well as man. And behold, these his servants were Elohim around him. And Abram served the moon and prayed to it all that night. And in the morning, when it was light, and the sun shone upon the earth as usual, Abram saw all things that Yahweh Elohim had made upon the earth. And Abram said unto himself, surely these are not Elohim that made the earth and all mankind, but these are the servants of Elohim. And Abram remained in the house of Noah. There knew Yahuwah and his ways, and he served Yahweh all the days of his life. And all that generation forgot Yahweh, and served other Elohim of wood and stone, and rebelled all their days. And King Nimrod reigned securely. All the earth was under his control, and all the earth was of one tongue and words of union. And all the princes of Nimrod and his great men took counsel together, put Mitzrayim, Cush, Kenya, with their families, and they said to each other, come, let us build ourselves a city in a strong tower, and its top reaching heaven, and we will make ourselves famed, so that we may reign upon the whole world, in order that the evil of our enemies may cease from us, that we may reign mightily over them, and that we may not become scattered over the earth on account of their wars. And they all went before the king, and they told the king these words. And the king agreed with them in this affair, and he did so. And all the families assembled, consisting of about 600,000 men, and they went to seek an extensive piece of ground to build the city and the tower. And they sought in the whole earth, and they found none like one valley at the east of the land of Shinar, about 2 days' walk, and they journeyed there, and they dwelt there. And they began to make bricks and burn fires to build the city and the tower that they had imagined to complete. And the building of the tower was unto him a transgression and a sin. And they began to build. And while they were building against Yahuwah Elohim of heaven, they imagined in their hearts to war against him and to ascend to heaven. And all the people and all the families divided themselves into 3 parts. The first said, we will ascend to heaven and fight against him. The second said, we will ascend to heaven and place our own Elohim there and serve them. And the third part said, we will ascend to heaven and smite him with bows and spears. And Elohim knew all their works and all their evil thoughts. And he saw the city and the tower which they were building. And when they were building, they built themselves a great city and a very high and strong tower. And on account of its height and mortar and bricks did not reach the builders in their ascent to it, until those who went up had completed a full year. And after that, they reached to the builders and gave them the mortar and the bricks. Thus it was done daily. And behold, these ascended and others descended the whole day. And if a brick should fall from their hands and get broken, they would all weep over it. And if a man fell and died, none of them would look at him. And Yahuwah knew their thought, and it came to pass when they were building, they cast the arrows towards the heavens, and all the arrows fell upon them, filled with blood. And when they saw them, they said to each other, surely we have slain all those that are in heaven. For this was from Yahuwah, in order to cause them to err, and in order to destroy them from off the face of the ground. And they built the tower and the city, and they did this thing daily until many days and years were elapsed. And Elohim said to the 70 angels who stood foremost before him, to those who were near him, saying, come, let us descend and confuse their tongues. And one man shall not understand the language of his neighbor. And they did so unto them. And from that day following, they forgot each man his neighbor's tongue, and they could not understand to speak in one tongue. And when the builder took from the hands of the neighbor lime or stone, which he did not order, the builder would cast it away and throw it upon his neighbor, that he would die. And they did so many days, and they killed many of them in this manner. And Yahuwah smote the 3 divisions that were there, and he punished them according to their works and designs. Those who said, we will ascend to heaven and serve our Elohim, became like apes and elephants. And those who said, we will smite the heaven with arrows, Yahuwah killed them, one man through the hand of his neighbor. And the 3rd division of those who said, we will ascend to heaven and fight against Yahuwah, scattered them throughout the earth. And those who were left among them, when they knew and understood the evil which was coming upon them, they forsook the building, and they also became scattered upon the face of the whole earth. And they ceased building the city and the tower. Therefore he called that place Babel, for there Yahuwah confounded the language of the whole earth. Behold, it was at the east of the land of Shinar. And as to the tower which the sons of men built, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up 1/3 part thereof. And a fire also descended from heaven and burnt another third. And the other third is left to this day, and it is that part which was aloft. and its circumference is 3 days' walk. And many of the sons of men died in that tower, a people without number. And Peleg, the son of Eber, died in those days in the 48th year of the life of Abram, son of Terach. And all the days of Peleg were 239 years. And when Yahuwah had scattered the sons of men on account of their sins at the tower, behold, they spread forth into many divisions, and all the sons of men were dispersed into the 4 corners of the earth. And all the families became each according to its language, its land, or its city. And the sons of men built many cities according to their families in all the places where they went, and throughout the earth, where Yahuwah had scattered them. And some of them built cities in places from which they were afterwards extirpated, and they called these cities after their own names, or the names of their children, or after their peculiar occurrences. And the sons of Japheth, the son of Noah, went and built themselves cities in the places where they were scattered, and they called their cities after their names. And the sons of Japheth were divided among the face of the earth into many divisions and languages. And these are the sons of Japheth according to the families: Gemer, Magog, Madi, Yavan, Tubal, Meshach, and Thirach. These are the children of Japheth according to their generations. And the children of Gemer according to their cities were Francum, who dwelt in the land of Franza, by the river Franza, by the river Senah. And the children of Riphath are the Bartonim, who dwelled in the land of Bartonia, by the river of Ledah, which empties its waters in the great sea Gihon, that is Oceanus. And the children of Tugarma are 10 families, and these are their names: Bezar, Parzunik, Balgar, Elikanim, Ragbib, Tarki, Bid, Vevuk, Ongal, Tilmaz. All these spread and rested in the north and built themselves cities, and they called their cities after their own names. Those are they which abide by the rivers Hethlah and Italic to this day. But the families of Agoli, Belgar, Parzunik, they dwell by the great river Debni, and their names of their cities are also according to their own names. And the children of Yavan are the Yevulim, who dwell in the land of Macedonia, and the children of Madi are Orlam, that dwell in the land of Curson. And the children of Tubal are those that dwell in the land of Tassanah, by the river of Pasha. And the children of Meshach are Shebnashi, and the children of Thirach are Rush, Ash, Cushani, and Angolas. All these went and built themselves cities. These are the cities that are situated by the sea Yavak, by the river Kurah, which empties itself into the river Tragon. And the children of Elisha are Almashim, and they also went and built themselves cities. Those are the cities situated between the mountains of Ayev and Shivamo, and of them were the people Lombardi, who dwelt opposite the mountains of Ayav and Shivamo, and they conquered the land of Italia and remain there to this day. And the children of Kidium are the Romium, who dwell in the valley of Canopia by the river Thebriu. And the children of Donayim are those that dwell in the cities of the sea, Gihon, in the land of Bardona. These are the families of the children of Japheth, according to their cities and languages, when they were scattered after the tower, and they called their cities after their names and occurrences. And these are the names of their cities according to their families, which they built in those days after the tower. And the children of Ham were Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Kinian, according to their generations and cities. All these went and built themselves cities as they found fit places for them, and they called their cities after the names of their fathers: Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, Kenyanin, and the children of Mitzrayim are Lude, Amayim, Lebayim, Naphtuhim, Pathrukim, Klakukim, and Kapatorim, 7 families. All these dwell by the river of Shikar. That is the brook of Mitzrayim, and they built themselves cities and called them after their own names. And the children of Pathrak and Kaklok intermarried together, and from them went Pelashim and Gazathim and Geraim and Gittaim and the Ekronim, and all 5 families. These also built themselves cities, and they called their cities after the names of their fathers to this day. And the children of Canaan also built themselves cities, and they called their cities after their names, 11 cities, and others without number. And 4 men from the family of Ham went to the land of the plain. These are the names of the 4 men: Sedom, Amorah, Admah, and Tesavim. And these men built themselves 4 cities in the land of the plain, and they called their names of the cities after their own names. And they and their children and all belongings to them dwelt in the cities, and they were fruitful and multiplied greatly and dwelt peaceably. And Sayer, the son of Sari, son of Shevi, son of Canaan, went and found a valley opposite to Mount Paran, and he built a city there. And he and his 7 sons and his household dwelt there. And he called the city which he built Sayar, according to his name. That is the land Sayar to this day. These are the families of the children of Ham, according to their languages and cities, when they were scattered to their countries after the tower. And some of the children of Shem, son of Noach, father of all children of Eber, also went and built themselves cities in the places wherein they were scattered, and they called their cities after their names. And the sons of Shem were Elam, Asher, Arpachshed, Ludi, and Aram, and they built themselves cities and called the names of their cities after their names. And Asher, son of Shem, and his children and household went forth at that time, a very large body of them. And they went to a distant land that they found, and they met with a very extensive valley in the land that they went to, and they built themselves 4 cities, and they called them after their own names and occurrences. And these are the names of the cities which the children of Ashur built: Nineveh, Rechem, Calach, Rechovoth. And the children of Ashur dwelt there unto this day. And the children of Abram also went and built themselves a city, and they called the name of the city Uz, after their eldest brother, and they dwelt therein. That is the land of Uz to this day. And in the 2nd year, after the tower of man from a house of Ashur, whose name was Bela, went from the land of Neviah to sojourn with his household wherever he could find a place. And they came unto opposite the cities of the circle of Yarden against Sedom, and they dwelt there. And the man rose up and built there a small city, and called its name Bela, after his name, that is the land of Tasar, and to this day. And these are the families of the children of Shem, according to their language and cities, after they were scattered upon the earth after the tower. And every kingdom, city, and family of the families of the children of Noach built themselves many cities after this. And they established governments in all their cities in order to be regulated by their orders. So did all the families of the children of Noach forever. And Nimrod, son of Cush, was still in the land of Shinar, and he reigned over it and dwelt there, and he built cities in the land of Shinar. And these are the names of the 4 cities which he built, and he called their names after the occurrences that happened to them in the building of the tower. And he called the first Babel, saying, because Yahweh there confounded the language of the whole earth. And the name of the second he called Erech, because from where Elohim dispersed them. And the third he called Akkad, saying, there was a great battle at the place. And the fourth he called Calneh, because his princes and mighty men were consumed there. And they vexed Yahweh. They rebelled and transgressed against him. And when Nimrod had built these cities in the land of Shinar, he placed them in the remainder of his people. These princes and his mighty men were left in his kingdom. And Nimrod dwelt in Babel, and he there renewed his reign over the rest of his subjects, and he reigned securely. And the subjects and princes of Nimrod called his name Amraphel, saying that at the tower his princes and men fell through his means. And notwithstanding this, Nimrod did not return to Yahweh, and he continued in wickedness and teaching wickedness to his sons of men. And Murdon, his son, was worse than his father, and he continued to add to the abominations of his father. And he caused the sons of men to sin. Therefore it is said, from the wicked goes forth wickedness. At that time there was war between the families of the children of Ham, as they were dwelling in the cities which they had built. And Kedorla Omar, king of Elam, went away from the families of the children of Ham, and he fought with them, and he subdued them. And he went to the 5 cities of the circle of the Yarden, and he fought against them, and he subdued them, and they were under his control. And they served him 12 years, and they gave him a yearly tax. At the time died Nahor, the son of Serug, in the 49th year of the life of Abram's son Terach. And in the 15th year of the life of Abram, son of Terach, Abram came forth from the house of Noach and went to his father's house. And Abram knew Yahweh, and he went in his ways and instructions, and Yahweh Eloheinu was with him. And Terach, his father, was in those days still captain of the host of King Nimrod, and he still followed strange Elohim. And Abram came to his father's house, and he saw 12 Elohim standing there in their temples. And the anger of Abram was kindled when he saw these images in his father's house. And Abram said, as Yahweh lives, these images shall not remain in my father's house. So shall Yahweh, who created me, do unto me, if in 3 days' time I do not break them all. And Abram went from them, and his anger burned within him. And Abram hastened and went from the chamber to his father's outer court. And he found his father sitting in the court, and all his servants with him. And Abram came and sat before him. And Abram asked his father, saying, Father, tell me, where is Elohim, who created heaven and earth, and all the sons of men upon earth, and who created you and me? And Terach answered his son Abram and said, Behold, those who created us are all with us in this house. And Abram said to his father, My Lord, show them to me, I pray you. And Terach brought Abram into the chamber of the inner court. And Abram saw, and behold, the whole room was full of Elohim of wood and stone, 12 great images, and others than they without number. And Terach said unto his son, Behold, these are they which made all of you see upon earth, and which created me and you, and all mankind. And Terach bowed down to his Elohim, and he then went away from them, and Abram his son went away with him. And when Abram had gone from them, he went to his mother and sat down before her. And he said to his mother, Behold, my father has shown me those who made heaven and earth, and all the sons of men. Now, therefore, hasten and fetch a kid from the flock, and make it savory meat, that I may bring it to my father's Elohim as an offering for them to eat. Perhaps I may thereby become acceptable to them. And his mother did so, and she fetched a kid and savory meat thereof, and brought it to Abram. And Abram took the savory meat from his mother and brought it before his father's Elohim, and he drew nigh to them, and they might eat, and Tarach his father did not know of it. And Abram saw on the day when he was sitting amongst them that they had no voice, no hearing, no motion, and not one of them could stretch forth his hand to eat. And Abram mocked them and said, Surely the savory meat that I prepared has not pleased them, or perhaps it was too little for them, and for that reason they would not eat. And therefore tomorrow I will prepare fresh savory meat, better and more plentiful than this, in order that I may see the result. And it was on the next day that Abram directed his mother concerning the savory meat, and his mother rose and fetched 3 fine kids from the flock, and she made of them some excellent savory meat, such as her son was fond of. And she gave it to her son Abram, and Terach his father did not know of it. And Abram took the savory meat from his mother, and brought it before his father's Elohim into the chamber, and he came nigh unto them that they might eat, and he placed it before them. And Abram sat before them all day, thinking perhaps they might eat. And Abram viewed them, and behold, they had neither voice nor hearing, nor did one of them stretch forth his hand to the meat to eat. And in the evening of that day in the house Abram was clothed with the Ruach Elohim. And he called out and said, Woe unto my father, and to this wicked generation, whose hearts are all inclined to vanity, who serve these idols of wood and stone, which can neither eat, smell, hear, nor speak, who have mouths without speech, eyes without sight, ears without hearing, hands without feeling, and legs which cannot move. Like them are those that made them and that trust in them. And when Abram saw all these things, his anger was kindled against his father, and he hastened and took a hatchet in his hand, and came to the chamber of the Elohim, and he broke all his father's Elohim. And when he had done breaking the images, he placed the hatchet in his hand of the great Elohim, which was there before them. And he went out, and Terach his father came home, for he had heard at the door the sound of the striking of the hatchet. So Terach came into the house to know what this was about. And Terach, having heard the noise of the hatchet in the room of the images, ran to the room to the images. And he met Abram going out, and Terach entered the room and found all the idols had fallen down and broken, and the hatchet in the hand of the largest, which was not broken, and the savory meat which Abram his son had made was still before them. And when Terach saw this, his anger was greatly kindled, and he hastened and went from the room to Abram. And he found Abram his son still sitting in the house. And he said to him, What is this work you have done to my Elohim? And Abram answered Terach his father, and he said, Not so, my lord, for I brought savory meat before them. And when I came nigh to them with the meat that they might eat, they all at once stretched forth their hands to eat, before the great one had put forth his hand to eat. And the large one saw the works that they did before him, and his anger was violently kindled against them. And he went and took the hatchet that was in the house, and came to them, and broke them all. And behold, the hatchet is yet in the hand, as you can see. And Terach's anger was kindled against the son Abram when he spoke this. And Terach said to Abram his son in his anger, What is this tale that you have told? You speak lies to me. Is there in these Elohim Ruach, soul or power to do all you have told me? Are they not wood and stone? And have I not myself made them? And can you speak such lies, saying that the large Elohim that was with them smote them? It is you that did place the hatchet in the hands, and then say he smote them all. And Abram answered his father and said to him, And how can you then serve these idols, in whom there is no power to do anything? Can these idols in which you trust deliver you? Can they hear your prayers when you call upon them? Can they deliver you from the hands of your enemy? Or will they fight your battles for you against your enemies, that you should serve woods and stone, which can neither speak nor hear? And how surely it is not good for you, nor for the sons of men that are connected with you to do these things. Are you so silly, so foolish, or so short of understanding that you will serve wood and stone and do after this manner and forget Yahweh Elohim, who made heaven and earth and who created you in the earth, and thereby bring a great evil upon your souls in this manner by serving stone and wood? Did not our father in those days of old sin in this manner? And Yahweh Elohim of the universe brought the waters of the flood upon them and destroyed the whole earth? And how can you continue to do this and serve Elohim of wood and stone, who cannot hear or speak or deliver you from oppression, thereby bringing down the anger of Elohim of the universe upon you? Now, therefore, my father, refrain from this, and bring not evil upon your soul and the souls of your household. And Abram hastened and sprang from before his father, and took the hatchet from his father's largest idol, with which Abram broke it, and ran away. And Terach, seeing all Abram had done, hastened to go from his house, and he went to the king, and he came before Nimrod, and stood before him, and bowed down to the king. And the king said, "What do you want?" And he said, "I beseech you, my lord, to hear me. Now, 50 years back, a child was born to me, and thus has he done to my Elohim, and thus has he spoken. And now, therefore, my lord and king, send for him, that he may come before you, and judge him according to the law, that we may be delivered from his evil." And the king sent 3 of his servants, and they went and brought Abram before the king. And Nimrod and all his princes and servants were that day sitting before him, and Terach sat also before him. And the king said to Abram, "What is this that you have done to your father and to his Elohim?" And Abram answered the king in his words that he spoke to his father, and he said, "The large Elohim that was with them in the house did it to them, what you have heard." And the king said to Abram, "Had they power to speak and eat, and do as you have said?" And Abram answered the king, saying, "And if there be no power in them, why do you serve them and cause the sons of men to err through their follies? Do you imagine that they can deliver you or do anything small or great, that you should serve them? And why will you not sense the Elohim of the whole universe, who created you, and in whose power it is to kill and keep alive? O foolish, simple, and arrogant king, woe unto you forever! I thought you would teach your servant the upright way, but you have not done this, but have filled the whole earth with your sins and the sins of your people who have followed your ways. Do you not know, or have you not heard, that this evil which you do, our ancestors sinned therein in the days of old, and the eternal Elohim brought the waters of the flood upon them and destroyed them all, and also destroyed the whole earth on their account? And will you and your people rise up now and do like unto this work, in order to bring down the anger of Yahweh Elohim of the universe, and to bring evil upon you and the whole earth? Now, therefore, put away this evil deed which you do, and serve the Elohim of the universe, as your soul is in his hands, and then it will be well with you. And if your wicked heart will not hearken to my words to cause you to forsake your evil ways and to serve the eternal Elohim, then will you die in shame in the latter days, you, your people, and all who are connected with you, hearing your words or walking in your evil ways. And when Abram had ceased speaking before the king and princes, Abram lifted up his eyes to the heavens, and he said, Yahweh sees all the wicked, and he will judge them. And when the king heard the words of Abram, he ordered him to be put into prison, and Abram was 10 days in prison. And at the end of those days, the king ordered that all the king's princes and governors of different provinces and sages should come before him. And they sat before him, and Abram was still in the house of confinement. And the king said to the princes and sages, "Have you heard what Abram, the son of Terah, has done to his father? Thus hath he done to him, and I ordered him to be brought before me. And thus he has spoken. His heart did not misgive him, neither did he stir in my presence. And behold, now he is confined in prison. And therefore decide what judgment is due to this man who reviled the king, who spoke and did all the things that you heard." And they all answered the king, saying, "The man who rivals the king should be hung on a tree, but have done all these things that he said, and have despised our Elohim. He must therefore be burnt to death, for this is the law in this manner. If it pleases the king to do this, let him order his servants to kindle a fire both night and in day in brick furnace, and then we will cast this man into it." And the king did so, and he commanded his servants that they should prepare a fire for 3 days and 3 nights in the king's furnace, that is Kashnim. And the king ordered them to take Abram from prison and bring him out to be burned. And all the king's servants, princes, lords, governors, and judges, and all the inhabitants of the land, about 900,000 men, stood opposite the furnace to see Abram. And all the women and the little ones crowded upon the roofs and the towers to see what was doing with Abram. And they all stood together at a distance. And there was not a man left that did not come on that day to behold the scene. And when Abram was come, the conjurers of the king and the sages saw Abram, and they cried out to the king, saying, "Our sovereign Lord, surely this is the man whom we know to have been the child at whose birth the great star swallowed the 4 stars, which we declared to the king now 50 years since. And behold, now his father has also transgressed your commandments and mocked you by bringing you another child, which you did kill." And when the king heard their words, he was exceedingly wroth, and he ordered Terah to be brought before him. And the king said, "Have you heard what the conjurers have spoken? Now tell me truly, how did you, and if you shall speak truth, you shall be acquitted." And seeing that the king's anger was so much kindled, Terah said to the king, "My lord and king, you have heard the truth, and what the sages have spoken is right." And the king said, "How could you do this thing, to transgress my orders, and to give me a child that you did not beget, and to take value for him?" And Terah answered the king, "Because my tender feelings were excited for my son at the time, and I took a son of my handmaid, and I brought him to the king." And the king said, "Who advised you to do this? Tell me, do not hide aught from me, and then you shall not die." And Terah was greatly terrified in the king's presence. And he said to the king, "It was Haran, my eldest son, who advised me to do this. And Haran was in those days that Abram was born 32 years old." But Haran did not advise his father to do anything, for Terah said this to the king in order to deliver his soul from the king, for he feared greatly. And the king said to Terah, "Haran, your son who advised you to do this, shall die through the fire with Abram, for the sentence of death is upon him for having rebelled against the king's desire in doing this thing." And Haran at that time felt inclined to follow the ways of Abram, but he kept it within himself. And Haran said in his heart, "Behold, now the king has seized Abram on account of these things which Abram did. And it shall come to pass that if Abram prevailed over the king, I will follow him. But if the king prevail, I will go after the king." And then Terach had spoken this to the king concerning Haran his son. The king ordered Haran to be seized with Abram, and they brought them both, Abram and Haran his brother, to cast them into the fire. And all the inhabitants of the land, and the king's servant and princes, and all the women and little ones were there, standing that day over them. And the king's servant took Abram and his brother, and they stripped them of all their clothes, excepting their lower garments, which were upon them. And they bound their hands and feet with linen cords. And the servants of the king lifted them up and cast them both into the furnace. And Yahweh loved Abram, and he had compassion over him. And Yahweh came down and delivered Abram from the fire, and he was not burnt. But all the cords with which they were bound him were burned, while Abram remained and walked about in the fire. And Haran died when they cast him into the fire. And he was burnt to ashes, for his heart was not perfect with Yahweh. And those men who cast them into the fire, the flame of the fire spread over them, and they were burned. And 12 men of them died. And Abram walked into the midst of the fire 3 days and 3 nights. And all the servants of the king saw him walking in the fire. And they came and told the king, saying, Behold, we have seen Abram walking about in the midst of the fire, and even the lower garments which were upon him are not burned, but the cord with which he was bound is burned. And when the king heard their words, his heart fainted, and he would not believe him. So he sent the other faithful princes to see this matter. And they went and saw it and told it to the king. And the king rose to go and see it. And he saw Abram walking to and fro in the midst of the fire. And he saw Haran's body burned. And the king wondered greatly. And the king ordered Abram to be taken out of the fire. And his servants approached to take him out, and they could not, for the fire was round about, and the flames ascending towards them from the furnace. And the king's servant fled from it. And the king rebuked him, saying, Make haste and bring Abram out of the fire, that you shall not die. And the servants of the king again approached to bring Abram out, and the flames came upon them and burned their faces, so that the 8 of them died. And when the king saw that his servants could not approach the fire, lest they should be burned, the king called to Abram, O servant of Elohim, who is in heaven, go forth from the midst of the fire, and come hither before me. And Abram hearkened to the voice of the king. And he went forth from the fire, and came and stood before the king. And when Abram came out of the king, and all his servants saw Abram coming before the king with his lower garments upon him, for they were not burned, but the cord with which he was bound was burned. And the king said to Abram, How is it that you were not burned in the fire? And Abram said to the king, The Elohim of heaven and earth, in whom I trust, and who has all in his power, he delivered me from the fire into which you did cast me. And Haran, the brother of Abram, was burnt to ashes, and they sought for his body, and they found it consumed. And Haran was 82 years old when he died in the fire of Kashdim. And the king, princes, and inhabitants of the land, seeing that Abram was delivered from the fire, they came and bowed down to Abram. And Abram said to them, Do not bow down to me, but bow down to the Elohim of the world, who made you, and serve him, and go in his ways, for it is he who delivered me from out of this fire, and it was he who created the souls of the Ruachoth of all men, and formed man in his mother's womb, and brought him forth in the world. And it is he who will deliver those who trust in him from all pain. And this thing seemed very wonderful in the eyes of the king and the princes. And Abram was saved from the fire, and that Haran was burned. And the king gave Abram many presents, and he gave him his 2 head servants from the king's house. The name of one was Oni, and the name of the other was Eleazar. And all the king's princes and servants gave Abram many gifts of silver and gold and pearl. And the king and his princes sent him away, and he went in peace. And Abram went forth from the king in peace, and many of the king's servants followed him. And about 300 men joined him. And Abram returned on that day and went to his father's house, and he and the men that followed him. And Abram served Yahweh Eloheinu all the days of his life, and he walked in his ways and followed his Torah. And from that day forward, Abram inclined the hearts of the sons of men to serve Yahweh. And at that time, Nechor and Abram took unto themselves women, the daughters of the brothers of Haran. The women of Nahor was Milcah, and the name of Abram's woman was Sarai. And Sarai, the woman of Abram, was barren, so she had no offspring in those days. And at the expiration of 2 years of Abram's going out of the fire, that is in the 52nd year of his life, behold, King Nimrod sat in Babel upon the throne, and the king fell asleep and dreamed that he was standing with his troops and hosts in a valley opposite the king's furnace. And he lifted up his eyes and saw a man in the likeness of Abram coming forth from the furnace. And that he came and stood before the king with his drawn sword, and then sprang into the king with his sword. When the king fled from the man, for he was afraid, and while he was running, the man threw an egg upon the king's head, and the egg became a great river. And the king dreamed that all his troops sank in that river and died. And the king took flight with 3 men who were before him, and he escaped. And the king looked at these men, and they were clothed in princely dresses as the garments of kings, and had the appearance and majesty of kings. And while they were running, the river again turned to an egg before the king. And there came forth from the egg a young bird, which came before the king, and flew at his head, and plucked out the king's eye. And the king was grieved at the sight, and he awoke out of his sleep, and his ruach was agitated, and he felt a great terror. And in the morning the king rose from his couch in fear, and he ordered all the wise men and magicians to come before him. When the king related his dream to them, and a wise servant of the king, whose name was Anaku, answered the king, saying, "This is nothing else but the evil of Abram and his seed, which will spring up against my lord and king in the latter days. And behold, the day will come when Abram and his seed and the children of his household will war with my king, and they will smite all king's host and his troop. And as to what you have said concerning 3 men, which you did see like unto yourself, and which did escape, this means that only you will escape with 3 kings from the kings of the earth, who will be with you in battle. And that which you saw of the river, which turned to an egg, as at first, when a young bird plucking out your eye, this means nothing else but the seed of Abram, which will slay the king in latter days. This is my king's dream, and this is its interpretation, and the dream is true, and the interpretation which your servant has given you is right. Now, therefore, my king, surely you know that it is now 52 years since your sages saw this at the birth of Abram. And if my king will suffer Abram to live in the earth, it will be unto injury of my lord and king. For all the days of Abram lives, neither you nor your kingdom will be established, for this was known formerly at his birth. And why will not my king slay him, that his evil may be kept from you in the latter days? And Nimrod hearkened to the voice of Anaku, and he sent some of his servants in secret to go and seize Abram and bring him before the king to suffer death. And Eleazar, Abram's servant, whom the king had given him, was at that time in the presence of the king, and he heard what Anaku had advised the king, and what the king had said to cause Abram's death. And the Eleazar said to Abram, "Hasten, rise up and save your soul, that you may not die through the hands of the king. For thus did he see in a dream concerning you, and thus did Anaku interpret it, and thus also did Anaku advise the king concerning you. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Eleazar, and Abram hastened and ran for safety to the house of Noah and his son Shem, and he concealed himself there and found a place of safety. And the king's servant came to Abram's house to seek him, but they could not find him. And they searched throughout the country, and he was not to be found. And they went and scattered in every direction, and he was not to be met with. And when the king's servant could not find Abram, they returned to the king. But the king's anger against Abram was stilled, as they did not find him. And the king drove from his mind this matter concerning Abram. And Abram was concealed in Noach's house for 1 month, until the king had forgotten his matter. But Abram was still afraid of the king, and Terah came to see Abram, his son, secretly in the house of Noach. And Terah was very great in the eyes of the king. And Abram said to his son, "Do you not know that the king thinks to slay me and to annihilate my name from the earth by the advice of his wicked counselors? Now whom have you here, and what have you in this land? Arise, let us go together to the land of Canaan, that we may be delivered from his hand, lest you perish also through him in the latter days. Do you not know, or have you not heard, that it is not through love that Nimrod gives you all this honor, but it is only for his benefit that he bestows all his good upon you? And if he do unto you greater good than this, surely these are only vanities of the world, for wealth and riches cannot avail in the day of wrath and anger. Now, therefore, hearken to my voice, and let us arise and go to the land of Canaan, out of the reach of injury from Nimrod, and serve Yahuwah, who created you in the earth, and it will be well with you, and cast away all the vain things which you pursue." And Abram ceased to speak. When Noah and his son Shem answered, Terah said, "True is the word which Abram has said unto you." And Terah hearkened to the voice of his son Abram, and Terah did all that Abram said, for this was from Yahuwah, that the king should not cause Abram's death.